All right. So when we're working in Photoshop, there are a couple of different ways to work. One is destructively, the other one's non-destructively. And we're going to focus on non-destructive editing. The difference between the two is probably fairly apparent. Destructive editing basically means that once the changes that we make to an image, once we've saved those and want to reopen the file again, those changes are already set. They're made, and if there's something about them that's not right, I can't go back and do anything about it. They're done. I've basically destroyed, for lack of a better term, destroyed my original image. All right. So, and destructive editing, kind of takes a lot of forms. I can, create a paintbrush and, let's do that make a little more sense out of that. I could pick a paintbrush and decide to, very crudely, black out windows, all right? Now, if I save that file, I've still got my history. So if I'm, and the workspace I'm working in here is, by the way, I should always let you know. Let's go ahead and work in. I'm just going to work in Essentials. So, I've made that edit, and if I take a look at my workspace here, I've got a history panel, and it's this little one with 3 dots. Basically, any action that I take, it records it, and if I need to go back and undo it, I can do that. So I painted, directly on the image, used my paintbrush, painted over the windows, saved it, it's there. So long as I'm in the same working session, this history panel is available and I can go back. But what I can't do is, if I open this up, I've blacked out this window, and maybe I decide to, with white, I decided to, I don't know, for whatever reason, kind of paint in a little area down here, painting right over top of that image. I can still undo this stuff, but say I want to keep the white and just remove the black. Well, I can't just go back up here to get rid of the black without also undoing everything after it. So history and undos are good, for kind of sequenced kinds of things, but I'm still kind of destroying the image as I work on it. And even worse is, I go back out here, save this file, I'm going to close it. Now if I go back, and I did the thing I always tell everybody not to do, working on my downloads folder, but if I go back to reopen that file, I've made those changes, but you see there's nothing in my history. So when I work destructively, for quick little things or quick color tweaks, I could probably do that and get away with it, and it's fine. But, I've made these changes to this image, and I can't, that's all I can do, So what we want to do is work non-destructively, and which actually means I even painted over top of the image that I wanted to work with, so I need to go back, re-download that file. And start over. All right. So I showed you what happens when I work destructively. But if I'm going to work non-destructively, I can make those same changes, except this time, instead of doing that, I'm going to use my, do I need to change this? Nope. So I'm going to go over here to my layers panel, and I'm going to add a layer. And, I got my blacked out skylight. So I can go up here, find my skylight. I can paint it out. I can go back down here into the alleyway, create a new layer. And paint over that, whatever that is, snow, I guess, seems appropriate. So these are on different layers now. So I can turn off the individual layers if I want to see what's underneath it. I've still got all of my history here. More importantly, when I save it, I'm basically going to do a save as. So now let's do this right. I'm going to go to where I work at on my computer, and we'll do a new folder. Photoshop demo. And I'm going to save this file here. So this is my alleyway. I'm just going to give it a different name. And I'm going to save it as a PSD file. So one of the things I'm going to talk about, I think, before I get done here, unless I wait and do it Wednesday. When we're working on a Photoshop file, we're always keeping our layers, we're always saving it as a .psd file. Consider a .psd file your master file that you're working with. So no matter what project you're working on, you're saving that PSD file, making your edits to the document. That's your master file. If I need to then, once I'm done, if I need to export this out as a JPEG or a PNG or something to that effect, a different size, I'm going to export it out of there and create another, just a flattened image file. But as we're working on a file, we're saving as PSD files. So, alley, PSD, and make sure it's set to it'll be set by default to Photoshop as a format if you've got layers in it. So I've saved this. Now when I go back and, in contrast to what I did just a moment ago, now if I close this file out, but go back in to my work folder, reopen that file, everything's still on a layer. I decide that putting the snow in the alleyway wasn't really the thing to do. I can make that edit now. So from work session to work session, I want to be able to always roll back changes in varying amounts until I've got my final image. And that's non-destructive editing. And this is just this is the simplest, most basic example I can give you. I mean, there are a lot of ways to do non-destructive editing beyond just different layers, but that's the difference between destructive editing and non-destructive editing. So in destructive, the edits we make are fixed and they're permanent for all intents and purposes. Non-destructive, we can always at any point roll back. I can undo both of those changes and I'm back to my original image. And that's what I always really kind of work to do when I'm just making edits to an individual image is, if I turn off all my layers, the different type, whether it's a smart layer, a group layer, whatever it is, I can always roll back to my original image. All right? So when I've done the non-destructive thing right, I can get back here at any given moment. All right? It's hugely beneficial, for saving time, reduces your work, that kind of thing. Working non-destructively, though, files do get bigger. They get pretty big, large. But, you know, that's generally the way we work. So I'm going to ignore destructive editing because I never want to work that way. So everything I'm going to do is focus towards non-destructive. All right? Any question about the difference? We all good? All right. So I've made these edits, actually. I don't like those edits at all. Let's dump those. So before I get into layers, talking about the different masks we have there, I'm going to talk about alpha channels. So we can, if I jump over to my channels menu, or panel, remember that, you know, whenever I did my quick run through of the interface, I pointed this panel out. And basically, this RGB image is made up of 3 different channels, R, G, and B. So if I turn off my red and green and I'm left with my blue channel, it's just a black and white image. And it's much like a negative, you know, a black and white negative for the most part. The blue channel only contains the color blue that's used in the image. And they kind of, it tends to it brings in color if I add if I add green in on top of it, it gets very, kind of blue. And then I turn on my red, that's all 3 of them together, and that's what makes up my full color image. So, while that's all cool, you may wonder why we care, because we're really only working on the color image. But we can create additional channels. We don't have to just have only these 3. And when I talk about alpha channels, as well as like layer masks and vector masks, they're all very similar. They look to be the same, but they're stored differently. And I can create alpha channels. An additional channel here is an alpha channel. So if I'm in my channel panel, and if I go down to the bottom to these 3 icons, enlarge these so we can see them. I can make a selection of a channel. I can create a new channel. I can add a channel. I can create a mask within a channel, and I can also delete a channel. So I'm not going to be able, I don't think, to, if I select my blue channel here, I don't think I can, no, they will let me delete individual color channels. So I can delete those individual channels if I want, although I don't have a good reason for it. But what I can do is create new ones. So if I click the little square with the plus inside of it and create a new one, which I can also do by going up here and selecting new channel in this little hamburger menu. It's the top of every menu, new channel. That'll create a new channel as well. And it just names them Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. So I'm going to delete that one. And by default, it makes it black. So generally, when we're talking about channels and alpha channels, as well as masks, they're always a black and white kind of a thing, a black and white image. Black is always transparent, white is always opaque. So if I turn on just my red channel here, basically the black represents the red color that's in my image. The white is transparent, which means there's no color. And when I create an alpha channel, by default, it's black, which means that there's nothing in there, which sometimes seems a little counterintuitive. It's like, well, if it was white, then there'd be nothing in there. But no, when we're talking about channel masks and channels like this, white is always opaque, which is a good thing to remember it means that absolutely any black and white image you can use as a channel. And you can, if you think that through, you can get really kind of pretty creative with that idea, especially because this whole black and white dichotomy carries through in Illustrator. It's that way if you make a mask in Illustrator. But in After Effects, when we create alpha and luma masks, they're black and white images. So, and what's even better there is, in After Effects, those are moving images. So theoretically, I can create really kind of cool moving masks as well. But either way, when we're talking about masks, white is opaque, black is transparent every single time. So, and I just told you backwards. I just dawned on me. I told you backwards just a second ago. The white areas are any place that has the red. The lighter color areas. The black are the absence of red. So, not the first thing I've turned around today. So, anyway, I made a mask. I want to turn all of these off. This mask shows as sort of a red onion skin kind of a color. I'm going to turn off all my other channels. And I'm just going to, I can really do pretty much anything I want to inside of this. I'm just going to grab a paintbrush and for just, just for an example, I'm going to grab do that, nice big brush. Let's do that. And I'm just going to kind of paint a little shape in through here, all right? So remember, white's opaque, black is transparent. Now if I turn my other layers back on, I can see that basically what I'm creating here is a mask of this area. And now I can take this and I can create a layer mask out of it if I want to, or mask this image in any other way I want. Like I said, I can create a variety of them, whatever I want to do. But so this, when the red shows my mask. And in the capacity that I have it right now, it really doesn't mean a whole lot, but this is the way masks appear no matter what kind of mask you're using. So I can always, in this alpha mask that I made, I can make a selection out of that alpha mask. So if I come down here, remember the far left one is make a selection. So if I select that, come back over here into my, I'm going to turn that off. Come back over here into my layers. And I'm actually going to duplicate my background layer just so I preserve the original in case I want to change this. Now I've made this selection, and within this layer, I can come down here to the bottom, and there's a variety of options here, which I'll look at in a minute, but I can create a mask by clicking on this little white rectangle. And when I do, I've used that alpha mask now to create a mask of my image. This isn't normally the way we would create a mask like for something like this, but it works. And I kind of want to get channel masks, alpha masks out of the way before I jump into layer masks. So this looks just like this, except that now where this mask applies to the image overall, or the alpha mask applies to the image overall, this mask only applies to this particular layer. Because if I turn my background layer back on, now I'm seeing through the black area, and it brings back the rest of my image. Does that make sense? The exercise we're going to do in a minute, we're actually going to combine some alpha masks to make something a little more dynamic. I just want to show you what they are to kind of get through the explanation before we go into that. So if I deselect all that and look at my channels again, I still only have my alpha mask. But if I select this layer, which now I've selected the mask, this layer mask as well, I also see this in my channels menu, my channels panel. But it'll go away as soon as I deselect the layer. So they're kind of the same thing, except this one was made out of this one, basically. All right? So I want to name this image my alley image, because I always want to name all my layers. And so here I'm looking at an alpha mask. And this is where it gets kind of sometimes a little confusing, because now that I have this mask over here attached strictly to this layer, now it's just a layer mask. And like I said, in this particular instance, this only applies to this particular layer. So channel masks and alpha masks are raster images, because Photoshop is a raster file, right, or raster application, right? So even though we can do vector stuff in Photoshop, it's all pixels. So the same thing happens with these masks that happens with an image that we enlarge too far. If I've got a 5:7 image at 72 dpi, and I try to put it into another file, Illustrator, InDesign, blow it up 200%, it gets really soft and really pixely. These masks will as well, because they're just raster images, all right? But we do layer masks all the time because that's the way we get fine-grained control over the manipulation of certain areas of our image or the addition of other images. So, and I would say actually, probably, you'll use layer masks more than you use alpha masks or alpha channels. But alpha channels are part of the mix here, so we at least need to know that they're there and that we can use them. But most of the time, I think you're probably actually going to use layer masks, all right? So just the same way that, and you'll notice that this has a feathered edge on it, just the same way that white is opaque, black is transparent, the shades of gray actually allow tone to come through. So if I were to delete this, I'm going to delete this alpha mask. Delete it. All right, so I'm back to where I was. If I were to create, let's say I want to put a lightened border around this somehow. And I'm just going to sort of use my marquee tool, my selection tool, and draw a marquee around just the middle area. So once I've done this, I can actually invert that selection. And if I go up here to my select menu, I can do an inverse, which is Command or Shift Command I, and that'll actually select the outside border. I'm going to go to my Edit menu, Fill, and I'm going to fill that selection. Actually, let's do this. Deselect that to start with. I'm actually going to add an alpha channel. I'm going to add an alpha channel back to this. So select that layer, do that, then redo what I just did. Select that, do a select, inverse. Now in this alpha channel, I'm going to select that, and I'm going to fill this with 50% gray. And when I do, you'll see that in my layer mask, that's just the 50% gray color, but some of my original image is still showing through because tones of, scales of gray show and hide varying amounts. So we can kind of feather things together. So I'm also going to add another layer behind this. I'm going to go down here and add a solid. There we go. All right. So I put a white panel behind this so that I could see that 50% screen of the photo that's in there. So white is opaque, black's transparent, levels of gray are varying levels of transparency. All right? And these are, like I said, these are alpha masks. So, or layer masks. So, like I say, they're vector images just like anything else. All right? Any questions so far on that? Or anything I need to back up on? All right. Some of the things, like with making a selection, I'll go a little more into depth about some of the things I did there, but whenever I talk about selections, but just by way of showing you, layer masks and whatnot. It's the way we kind of organize everything. So, so like I say, layer masks are raster images, the made up pixels, all right? So there's a second kind of mask called a vector mask. And a vector mask is exactly what it sounds like. It's, it's a mask that we're going to make out of a vector shape. So if I were to actually do it right on this layer, but let's do something different here. I'm going to duplicate this background layer again. Turn that on, turn the rest of them off. All right. So now I'm going to use, I've also got the path panel here, which is I kind of left up for a reason. So now I'm going to make a vector mask for this. So if I go over here and grab my pen tool, and I'm just going to draw kind of an irregular shape. So we all learned how to use the pen tool in production 1. The pen tool works exactly the same way in Photoshop, After Effects, and whatnot, as it did in Illustrator. So I'm just going to create a path shape here. I can go down here and grab a selection tool like my open selection, select one of these points, change the direction of that path if I want. And now with this path selected, I can create a vector mask with this. So I got my path. If I go up to layer, vector mask, from the current path, you'll see that it adds a vector mask layer, and this is masking out everything outside of my path area. The difference between a vector, and you'll always be able to tell the difference, actually most of the time except for my example here. This gray area here on a vector mask will always be gray. On a regular layer mask, it'll be black. Black and tones of gray. So you'll be able to tell the difference that way. But why would we use a vector mask over an alpha mask? Again, I go back to the image size thing. If I've got a 5x7 image, it's 72 dpi with a vector mask in it. I drop it into Photoshop, and I blow that sucker up 400, 600%. My photo's gonna kind of go to crap, you know, because it's going to get really soft and the pixels are going to get big. But the vector mask is always going to stay sharp. So the vector mask will always maintain its sharpness. But even more so than that, if I want to change, as long as I have this layer mask selected, if I want to change the shape of this and start moving my handlebars around or points around, I can do so. So it's kind of like a clipping mask we might make in Illustrator in a way. You know, you can put a photo in Illustrator, draw a path over top of it, and select the two and create a clipping mask. It's very similar to the same thing. And again, as long as if I look at my paths panel, here's the original path that I made. And if I've got my layer with the vector mask applied to it, I'm always going to see that mask shape here on my paths panel. But if I deselect that layer and go back and look, it goes away. So these, you know, what we see in one, sometimes we see in the others, as far as these three panels go, but it depends upon what we have selected and what we don't. All right? So those are the three types. There's alpha, like I said, alpha channels to create masks. I'm going to show you in a minute why we might use an alpha channel compared to these. But we also we've also got layer masks and we've got layer vector masks. And you can actually have, if I go back to this layer, which has a raster, you know, has a regular layer mask on it. If I go back over here in my paths panel, and I've still got this work path showing, I'm actually going to rename this so it saves it. If I have that path selected, go back to this layer here, I can also add the vector mask on top of this raster. So I've got the path selected. See, I selected it there. Go back over here, select this layer. Layer, vector mask, current path, and it adds it right alongside. And now I can, let's say I decide to edit this. So not only do I have the mask made out of my vector shape, but it's also revealing the mask made from my alpha mask, layer mask. So you can see the gray part of that image there. So sometimes you'll end up with that even, and you don't understand how you got it. That's kind of how you get it. It's kind of purposeful, but it happens on accident. So, but those are the different types of masks and how they differ. All right, and it'll all make a little more sense here in a little bit whenever we actually do this little exercise. So we're actually going to do that. But I kind of wanted to run through, sort of get that out of the way so we understood what we were looking at before we move on. So let's see. All right. So those are our different mask types. One other thing about all our masks, they're also connected to our layer. So if I move this layer around, there's this little link. All of my masks go with it. But if I let's say I break the link between my vector mask and the rest of my layer, when I move my layer around, it'll move independently of my mask. And see my layer mask is still linked to the image, so it's going with it. If I break that link and move my image, my masks stay in place, but I can reposition, which is nice if, say in my composition, like kind of odd composition here, I want to move this around, adjust the position a little bit, I can do that. So they're all kind of linked up that way. All right? Any questions about that or anything I lost you on? All right. So just focusing on the masks, I want to kind of have you guys work along with me. I'm actually going to show you a different use for the alpha mask. So I'm just going to, I'll save this as it is for now. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll show you what we're going to do. I've got, if I go back to the layers or the file that I uploaded earlier, I said, did y'all download the files that I uploaded? Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll show you what I'm going to make and then. So I've got this texture of wood, and I'm actually going to use more specific, probably alpha masks actually, and an alpha channel to mask an image out and make it appear as though it's weathered on weathered wood. All right. The same process works for graphics on a brick wall, graffiti on a brick wall or anything else you want to do. Yeah. Where are the examples at? They should be under content. There's a directory called in class material, and there's a file right below that, sign on wood. Just download those files. All right. So that's the kind of thing we're going to do. And as we're doing it, actually, I'm going to introduce a couple other non-destructive ideas. So but this is the image an image like this is what we're going to create. And what we're actually going to do is use this wood texture to create a mask to give it this weathered kind of a look. So what I want you to do is open up the wood texture or the wood image into Photoshop. Should have that image. Once you've all got it open. All right, so we've got our wood image. We want to create a graphic to put on it, all right? So I'm going to, use the type tool. So if I come over here to my type tool on the toolbar, I'm going to just select that and come over here, and I had Kmart in the other one. I don't know. I was trying to think of something to put. I don't know. What should I type? I know. We'll type the word wharf. And with my type selected, I'm going to change my point size to about, I don't know, let's go to 800 to start with. And find an interesting typeface. I happen to have this typeface that works kind of well, but I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to create another text layer. Put your first name or something like that. And I'm just going to pick a different typeface for that. Maybe I'll pick something kind of scripty. Yeah, I don't like that. It's all uppercase. Yeah. Let's see what you got. Actually, I never really thought about that. There's some things I do are just kind of muscle memory and I forget. So. So anyway, we just kind of want two pieces of type. Oh, that's fine. There we go. That's what I wanted. And for now, I'm just going to kind of overlap these a little bit and not worry too much about them. So I've got that. This is a graphic that I'm actually going to put onto the wood. So once you've all got that, just sort of, I'll stop for a moment. So what I'm going to do next here, while you're getting your type on your screen, thinking ahead, what I'm actually going to do here is I've got two pieces of type, but I want these to maintain their editability, but treat them as a single unit. So I'm going to look at two different ways of organizing graphics like this within our layers panel. We're going to look at grouping. And they're just going to be grouped into a folder. And we're also going to look at creating a smart object, which smart objects are pretty powerful. So, so with our two pieces of type here, I'm going to start off. Do you get Photoshop open and everything? Did you get it? Almost there? Yeah. All right, good. Let you put a little bit of type on the screen. So what I want to do is take these, so I got these two pieces of type. I want to group them together, all right? And there's two different ways I can do that. I can come over here to my layer menu and select them both, and I can group them together, which I can do one of two different ways. I can either come down here to the bottom of my layer menu and there's a folder, and if I click on the folder and I've got those two selected, it'll group them together into a folder to keep them organized. All right? That's one thing I can do. And I'm going to name that type or text element. So that's one way of grouping. The other way of grouping, and actually if you just open that folder up that we just made and hold down your Option key and drag both those pieces of type out of it, we'll duplicate them. I just wanted a copy of those pieces of type. The other way I can group all this stuff together is to select those and through the little hamburger menu on the layers menu, we can go down through here and convert to smart objects, which will be about halfway down that menu. So I have the same thing here, I've just done it two different ways, but they've got different purposes. So as a smart object, these are basically one unit. All right? Anytime I grab it and move it, everything's going to go. But as a grouping, if I click on Russ's, I'm going to be able to move that object around the screen. It doesn't move with everything else. Even if I select this folder, whatever object I click on is the one that's going to move. So it's two different ways of grouping things together, but they work differently. Usually, when I create a smart object, it's because I have a composition that I want to always work with as a single unit. But I'll group them if I just kind of want to organize stuff. So the smart object always has this little disk icon image in the lower corner, and the grouping is just a folder. And when you open that folder up, you still have access to those two elements independently, whereas on the smart object, you don't. But what's really cool is, if I double click on this smart object in my layers menu, it opens that smart object up with my two elements inside of it, and I can make edits to it. So I could select my type, select my name, and change the color of it. And you see it open it up in a new tab. Just save that. And now when I come back over to my original image, save that, close it. Now that change is updated into my original file. So I can create a whole new composition this way and still go in and edit and modify that composition in any way I want to in a separate Photoshop file. And it maintains, it's all live type still. So if I want to make a variation, I can open that up, and it's Kaya's Wharf. Save it, close it, and it updates right into my Photoshop file. Anytime you apply within Photoshop, this is just sort of an aside, but it pertains. Being able to work with these elements as a composition is one benefit of working with a smart object. The other one is, you know how when you, if you place a blur, if you want to blur something in Photoshop, if you've messed around with Photoshop at all, blurs are fairly destructive. You've got a layer and you need to blur it. It affects the pixels on that layer all the time. However, with smart objects, you go and apply a smart blur to it, that'll be an additional, that'll become an editable object, so that if you blurred it too much and you want to change it, you can open up that editable object, change the value on it. And we'll look at that again later too, but that's another reason that this is a decent way of working with stuff. So, make the selection, decide how to group stuff together in a way that best suits you. But those are two other methods of doing this. All right? So we've got three different elements. I'm not actually going to work with the folder element at all, but I am going to keep it so I can show you how to add a mask to that here in a moment. So these two objects in our layer, we can add masks to those just like I did the goofy little masks I made earlier whenever I was playing around with masks. So what we're going to do is, if I refer back to my demo file, this is a smart object, and but what I've done is created a mask out of the wood texture. So here's where working with alpha channels becomes kind of cool. So if I'm gonna go to my background layer here, all right? Or does everybody have a smart object in a group, a set of grouping? I don't want to get too far ahead of you guys, so. All right? Everybody, we're all good? All right. Okay. So I'm going to select my background, and I'm going to jump over to my channels panel. Nope. Didn't mean for this to happen, but it's good it did. So looking at my channels, all of my layers that are turned on right now, I'm seeing the RG and the B representation of all of those, right? But I don't really want that because I want to be able to take this wood texture and I'm going to extract some information from it. So I'm going to go back over here and turn off my smart object in my layers panel so that only the wood is what I'm looking at. Now when I go back over here, I've got just the wood channels. And what I want to do is, so if I'm doing weathered wood, and to be quite honest, I mean, I've done this a dozen times, so it's like, I kind of already know what I'm headed towards. But anytime I do something like this, I'll usually find as much reference on that as I can. Like if I'm looking for, faded sign on wood, I'll do a Google search to see what all I can find just to see how that really looks. What am I shooting for? That's what I got to figure out. What I know is that usually in weathered paint on wood, something or rock or anything else, it's the raised surfaces that weather away, right? Everything in the grooves tend to stay. So, anything in the recessed areas tend to stay. Actually, everything in the grooves of the planks has to go away, but we'll deal with that kind of separately. So what I'm going to do is take a look at all my channels here, and I'm just going to select one of them so the other ones all turn off. And if I look at these individually, just by clicking right on the icon, we'll see that they've all got different gray scale patterns to them, because the color distribution in the image. I want to pick one that I think probably best represents what I want to do. And I'm going to select the green channel. So I've got the green channel selected. And if I right click on that, and I can do the same thing by going through my little menu up here, but I'm going to right click on that green channel and I'm going to duplicate the channel. And this is going to be my wood texture mask. Wood texture alpha. Let's call it what it is. And you'll see now that instead of my 3 RGB channels, I've now got this 4th alpha. If I turn that on, the display on the screen is that if I've got this alpha channel selected, all those black values show up as red, which is the same as any selection mask does. So, but I'm going to turn off this blue because I just want to look at the black and white image on this wood texture alpha. And I'm going to take this and I want to darken it up a little bit. I want to sort of brighten some areas that I want to make sure paint stays on and darken some areas and that kind of thing. So with this selected, I'm going to go up to my image menu and there's an adjustments category. There are lots of different places to make color adjustments in Photoshop. This location is going to make a destructive change actually to this particular channel, but that's okay because I can always, if I get it wrong, I can always duplicate the original green channel again and try it another time. So I'm just going to select my levels And I'm going to brighten the whites, darken the blacks, and then I think I'm going to, knowing that the lighter areas are going to, I want the lighter areas to wear away, but the sign's going to stay in these recessed areas. And this just kind of comes about by sort of examining the image I've got and identifying what areas are what areas. I mean, you just got to kind of put your eye to that and kind of figure it out. But I'll do something like that just to darken it up a little bit and say, okay. So now I've got this alpha. And I can now take this, make a selection out of it. So, and I can do that one of two ways. I can come down here to this little selection icon at the bottom of the layer panel. It's always there, so I might as well just use it. I can also command click on something to select it, but we're going to do it that way. So I got all the little marching ants. Let's go back, and I'm going to actually turn this channel off so I've just got the selection. And I'm going to go back over to my layers channel. I'm going to select my smart object, and I'm going to add a mask to that layer. Based on, if I got the selection, the mask that I apply, the alpha mask, is going to match the selection. So we'll do that. And now if I zoom in on it, I'm getting the texture showing through that image. So this is kind of backwards though, if you notice. Remember I said earlier that I want the paint, given that my type is kind of like paint, I want the paint to be in the recessed areas, but be wear away from the higher areas. And if you can tell here, it's darker and more intense on the high areas than it is in some of these recessed areas. So I can always invert a mask by selecting it, invert or reverse it, select it, and if I do Command I on my keyboard, it'll flip it. So that was Command I. Yeah. Say it again. Well, so you want the, how do I get the mask to be applied just to this? Okay. So I'll go back and undo it. So if I go back here to my channel, so here's, I've got my wood texture here, so I'll select it real quick and make a selection out of it. All right. Turn my RGB back on. Now when I come over here to this, I turn this layer back on, and I'm going to go down here, and down at the very bottom, the mask is the third icon over. It's the white rectangle with a circle in the middle of it. Click on that, and it makes the mask. And like I said, the way I did it, this ends up being backwards. So I can select that mask, Command I on my keyboard, or Command I, or where is it? I forget where it's at in the menus. I kind of forget where things are in the menus sometimes because I know the key commands and I always use them. Yeah. If I just hit Command I, that'll invert it. So now it's worn off the high areas, but it's a little darker in some of these recessed ones. All right? So I can also add a mask like this to a grouping as well. So I'm going to turn this off for a moment and turn this back on. And go back here to my channels, grab my wood texture alpha, make the selection again. Come back over to my layers. If I select this group, I can apply a mask to the group folder overall. And anything that's inside of it will have the mask applied to it. So I can apply mask. So if I do that within my grouping, then again, I move anything around and the mask will apply to it appropriately. Everybody still with me? Yeah? Okay, good. Yeah. Oh. So what's that? Okay. Let me take a look. All right. Anybody else? Yeah? It's all right. So, if you've gotten this far, clean up your type, design it up a little bit. I mean, open up that smart object and make your adjustments and whatnot. Kind of make it a nice tight little composition. Because I just kind of ran through what the elements in. So, make it a nice tight composition. Some color. Okay. Yeah, so you made, okay, so you made it well, you made your output while you still had your type layer. So that's your You don't even have to do that. You don't even have to do the garbage element like I did before. But if you just select this one, that won't turn on. Now again, if you want to darken this up a little bit, let's select it. Just go to your image adjustments. Nope, adjustments, levels. And then just kind of drag your lights up a little bit by grabbing it. Nope, slant it. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, and pull this to black. Pull it this way. Okay. So again. Okay. Now we'll just make red select, make a select on the red. Now click on her. Select the page. Oh, you want to do this. You have to do select the page. And then left to go here. Smart object. Now that's selected. So now you just apply mask. There you go. Do not be zoom in on that. You'll see it. See how yeah. So then you do it that way, or I didn't work with the mask because I wanted to be backwards, but you select the mask. You do Command I. That would put it. Yeah, whichever way you like best. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, okay. Same way you did the smart object. Exactly. And you've already done all of them. You've already got the mask. So make the selection.
Awesome, thank you.
So, exactly the same process. Anyone else? All right. So, all right, I'm gonna go back to working with my smart object here because I like working with it better. All right. So now we can make whatever other edits we want to this. I'm gonna actually, I kind of like the idea of, we'll leave it like this. So, we can adjust, exactly those same processes though. If we decide that this is too weathered, it's just, there's not enough, contrast and it's not readable enough, we'd go back and adjust our alpha mask, or our alpha channel and try it again. But I think that kind of works more or less. So we've got our two items of type in our smart layer. Let's open that smart layer up. And I'm going to adjust my type a little bit. In case you didn't notice, if you can scale stuff, pretty much anything in Photoshop just by clicking on it, bringing up its bounding box, and then just moving the corner. Photoshop is backwards from every other Adobe app from the standpoint of, and by default, clicking and dragging on a corner constrains the scale. If you want to squish or whatever, you actually have to push down on the shift key to do this out of proportion. So where all the other apps, you got to hold down the shift key to proportionally scale. Photoshop, you don't have to hold down the shift key. Just to make everybody nuts, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, so this is just a graphic, and right now I've just got my type, my red type's over top of my white type, but I want to refine it a little bit. So I want to make a mask so that, let's see, what do I want it to do? I want to just kind of incorporate. How did I do this on my other one? I guess it was different, so I guess it doesn't really matter. Yeah, it was different. So I'm going to take and actually mask out. I'm going to put a little border sort of around my red type. And here, remember we also talked, when we talked about masks, because so far on our other image, we created the alpha channel, but we also created just a layer mask. We haven't done a vector mask. So let's do a vector mask to keep this type all nice and clean. And what I'm going to do is grab my pen tool and I want to scale my type down a little bit. Adjust its position. We'll do that. Place it wherever you want it. With my pen tool, I'm just going to kind of draw a mask around the W, the corner of the W. And just sort of draw an outline around the entire set of type. I'm going to go here and just kind of roughly outline this text. I'm not quite sure that's what I wanted to do. Oh, that wasn't what I wanted to do. I got that one wrong. Go down here. I'm just going to kind of really roughly do this for right now. What I did was outlined my block type because I kind of want to use this path once you've got that all outlined however you want it. We'll go up to our layer menu down to vector mask, and with that path selected, use current path to sort of outline everything. If I save that, go back over here, you'll see that Wharf stands out more. So the reason I did the vector mask for that aside from it's the only mask we actually haven't made yet, is that all my type is live, so it's all nice and crisp. I mean, if I need to blow it up, enlarge it, it's going to stay nice and clean, nice and crisp. And any outline, any masking out that I do, I want it to maintain the crispness as well. So that's kind of why I do that. And I can always go back in and adjust that path to clean up my outline, however I want to do it. How do you mean do it separately or together? Oh, I'm just kind of outlining all of it, and I'm just kind of rough out. I mean, you can do well. I mean, you could do them each individually if you wanted to. I mean, that would be fine. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if you like if I were to add another, so I've created this one already, but let's say that I want to also, say I want to, using my pen tool, I want to sort of knock out the middle of the W for whatever reason. I can do that. So I've got the second path, and it's just adding it to that vector mask. But you can have separate, I guess probably actually more appropriate to your question, you can have multiple paths within a vector mask like that. So one last thing, and it's the last thing I'm going to do with this. Remember that we can, like masks are linked by default. And did I move my mask? I think I did. I wasn't paying attention. Ah. So I've got, my wood grain texture is applied to, I wasn't paying attention and moved my type around with the mask still attached to it, so actually delete that, let me fix that. There. Alpha. All right. So remember that they're linked by default. So if we unlink that, our mask, the texture of our wood will stay in place, but I can still grab my smart object, enlarge it, and reposition it. We can do something kind of like that maybe. But in order to reposition the graphic and not mess up, you know, the wood grain mask that we've got to make sure that we break that mask, unlink them. Any questions on what I did? I really try not to go this long normally, doing a demo and then the work, but like I said, we don't have class on Monday, and I want to make sure that the first assignment requires a lot of masks, being able to, you know, control alpha channels as well as masks and that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure we get through it. And what kind of gives me is, especially since we're going to be gone for a week until next Wednesday, we can actually kind of revisit a smaller scale kind of little project just to sort of seat this in our minds. Because it's a pretty important part of working with Photoshop. So I was going to do selections tonight too, but I'll scrap that. We'll move it to next week. If I got to move a deadline or something, that's not a big deal. So, but what I would like you to do is to, you know, work on this a little bit, you know, kind of clean up your type. I mean, some other things I can show you about, just things I can point out. Like my type is not kerned very well, but we can, you know, kern type in Photoshop just the same way as we do anywhere else by selecting our type tool, placing the cursor right between the characters, holding down the Option key, and using the right and left arrows to move stuff around. I should have done that before I masked out my name, but I didn't, so I'll have to live with it. So we can kind of close up gaps in our type, you know, that way. And I'll actually But since I did it, I got to adjust them. And that's the nice thing about the vector mask is now I can go back up this vector mask that I made, and I can fix this stuff up. Put that over, put that up. So, anyway. Anyway, it needs cleaning up and it needs work, but you get the idea. Did not really. All right. So anyway, non-destructive methods of